Hey, Charlie or Shelley, what was the end result of the meeting this morning that I had to leave early? I'm just kind of curious. Is it a future
Not much
discussion?
else. No, we didn't. We
Okay.
did. We're going to have another work session somewhere. What, late March, early April, Jonathan?
Yeah, that is, I think, what was recalled. I think April.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So with not much else discussed after you left. In fact, we ended the meeting shortly after you left. You were
Okay.
gone. There was no purpose.
I thank you. Now I know my role.
Yeah, if we ever need to end a meeting, just announce that you got 5 minutes left, and we'll be done in 7.
All right.
All right, I think we're ready to go. We got everybody here. Potential charter changes. I think this is Councilor Hanlon and Assistant City Attorney Uten, maybe, or maybe just.
Well, yeah, it's nice that you advanced her to assistant city attorney. That's great. I'm done.
Oh,
I'm out. No,
you
actually,
say that's an advancement.
so really, I think there are kind of 2 or 3 big issues, and I'm sorry. Hopefully, you guys have a copy of the memo I provided a couple meetings ago that just kind of listed out some big areas. But I really think that there probably is 2 primary areas that you guys showed some interest in talking about. One is, what's actually the structure of council? Do you have an elected mayor or not? And I think that's a large question and just involves some discussion amongst yourself. The other one is, and this goes back to 2015, I think, when I started, and Mike Gamba, as the then mayor, really was kind of concerned about in light of elections that he had watched up in Aspen. And then, just as it's cool that we're getting more and more interest in seats for city council here in Glenwood. Is whether or not, to do something like ranked choice voting, or to be clear about the need for a runoff if we don't have a person elected to council by a majority. So those are kind of the 2 big areas I think that we want to talk about today. The third thing, and I think where I'd like to start, is that Jen and GIS have been working on ward maps, kind of updating what the ward map might look like. And obviously this is with 5 wards as we exist today. And again, as a reminder, the charter requires that you make any changes to the ward map at least a year ahead of your next regular municipal election. So regardless of what you decide to do with other charter changes, I do think it's probably worthwhile to go through and adopt new ward maps in the interim, even if you're going to move forward and put a question on the special election or next fall regarding structure of council or how elections are managed, just because, populations shift and change a little bit. And we haven't really looked at redistricting since 2001. Robin Milliard and I worked on it way back when. We did not update the ward maps at all after the 2010 census. And so just as a lead into that, the charter talks about registered voters. And so we tried to look at both voters and population, and also kind of generally knowing that some areas are going to see growth because of what is already development applications that have been approved. The Meadows in particular, I think that's Ward 4, the empty seat right now. That ward we know is going to see a population increase just because those apartment buildings are going to be finished and starting to be filled. And we know that we have a pending application for additional units that you guys will be seeing sometime over the summer out. The remainder of the residential out on Meadows. So we tried to think about all those things. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to walk through these maps.
Hi, everyone. So this is the existing ward map as it is today, and I'll scroll. So these are the voters, active voters from the last general. And we can't give you the populations of these because they split the census blocks. So these are the wards. And as you can see, Ward 1 has more voters in that than the other wards as they are existing today. So I'll just switch over to this map that Jenny in GIS put together that attempts to move the ward lines to kind of equal out the population and the voters. So, and I just orienting myself. We asked Jenny to fix this map and she just sent it to us this afternoon. So we've been working on it furiously. The idea here is that you have kind of a smaller number of voters and population in Ward 1 with this. And we also tried to move the lines to be with the census lines so that you can have the population be based on the census. And it shifts some of the population away from Ward 1 to even it out, knowing that Ward 1 will have 300 new units coming in soon.
And
I can try to go in a little bit if that's helpful.
No, it actually is helpful if you have all 4 or all 5 wards at the same time. But so yeah, maybe go out. But is this what we see on our screen right now? This is a point of reference. Is this proposed or is this current right now?
That is proposed. So I can switch back to the if you want to see the existing, I can show that.
Well,
Yes, actually leave it here because it's relatively easy to talk about. So things that shifted, Jonathan, Ward 5 would take in, drawing a blank on the name of it, the apartment buildings. Terraces. And then Ward 3 would take in the residential on the west side of Grand Avenue that is currently in Ward 1. And there's a little corner carved out, a little bit of extra actually behind my office, the block behind my office, that is currently in Ward 4, but I think the census tract lines don't match that. And we also know in Ward 4 that we do have a little bit of growth that's going to go on out there as well. So that's kind of what our thought process was. In the same with Ward 2. I mean, Ward 3 doesn't have a lot of potential large scale growth that we could anticipate over the next 10 years. Ward 2, Ward 1 and Ward 4 definitely have, some projects that are approved and going vertical that are going to impact them somewhat on population and probably voter counts over the next 10 years, and probably more like over the next 3 to 4.
And so some of the challenges of this is just that some of that section that's right there in the Ward 5, that's the addition right here. It's the block comes with a bunch of people. So it's not easy to, that's the same with this kind of pink section that's up here in Ward 2 is it comes with a bunch of people and you can't, the census block tract is large. So.
Yeah. And it also, reflects the other thing going on here is trying to maintain sort of neighborhoods and community of interest together to the maximum extent that we can. So obviously, splitting the terraces would not make a lot of sense since they're all similarly situated. Same thing with that large block up in Ward 2. We tinkered with, does that go into Ward 3, and things shift around a little bit. But you really don't want to split that up because that piece, that neighborhood is really a neighborhood. And so you don't necessarily want to split it up, just from the standpoint of who's your representative and who do you and your neighbors go to when you want to talk about a city issue.
Carl, do you have that same issue right there? Like that little, kind of looking at where Ward 5 is starting to encompass the terraces, and then there's Ward 4. And then there's a little bit of Ward 1 with the green area that looks like it has some housing in it.
Yeah.
Big better off with 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So you're talking about right here?
Yeah,
Further
still on
down,
the-
yeah,
yeah.
right there.
When
Yes.
Jenny had it highlighted, I think it is one whole.
Census block for
block.
whatever reason. But you're right. That's one of those places I think that on the prior map, I think we just went along the river in that section.
Yeah,
Um,
just feels like you're looking at Ward 4 or Ward 5, whichever it is, that you're kind of encompassing more of that same neighborhoods.
right.
And again, I know this is hard work, so I'm not trying to tell you guys
No,
how to
no,
do it.
not at all. And that's
Just
why
figure
we
it out.
brought it in. I mean, we were trying to match the census tracts if we could, because it's a great way to keep track of the population, but it may be that we need to modify to some extent or around things like that for sure. And that's part of why we're here talking to you guys.
Can I make a suggestion is just ward by ward, at least, sorry, Shelley and Tony for a second, but word by word, can we just kind of go through? Because I guess I have some questions on like Ward 5 and how that interacts and everybody else, but I'd love to just kind of hear from each individual ward representatives.
Sure, we're
Specific
gonna have a long presentation from Ward 1, and we're just gonna stick with that for now.
Okay.
Oh wait, we don't have a Ward 1 rep. So
I have a question,
Go ahead, Ingrid.
and that is, maybe we can take this and everyone can kind of digest it, and we can maybe even zoom in a little bit independently and put this for a future talking point, because aren't there other charter ideas and thoughts we need to discuss this evening as well?
there are. I just didn't know if, as we're thinking about making updates to this, we're going to want to take action on it at the next meeting, probably. So, I know, and for us, like, we've been working really hard, and we're sorry, we just came up with the final configuration this morning. A lot of that was about 18 hours of time with GIS trying to get all the data input so that now we can move lines around a lot easier and have a better idea how many people are where. So that was a big part of that kind of heavy lift. It's a lot easier for us to manipulate the map now. But so if we want to move on, when you guys are thinking about that, unless there's, it's up to you, Jonathan, how you want to handle it, you and the rest of the council.
Shelley has her hand up, but I guess I'm kind of curious, if we are going to take action on the next meeting, we should give you and Jen feedback enough on this map that you can bring back something to kind of get us from the 5-yard line to at least the 50-yard line, so then we don't have to.
Right.
So go ahead, Shelley. That'd be my question. I'd love to have that map back in front of us too, if Jen wouldn't mind.
Okay, sure. And really the only question I had is, I had heard a couple of people mention this concept of maybe going to fewer wards and more at-large representatives. But, when I look at this map and knowing that we are a relatively small city and we still have a small town, atmosphere, these are distinct neighborhoods with distinct different issues. So, I am fine with keeping the 5 wards and 2 at large and having those, because that makes sure that each of those neighborhood areas does have a ward representative that they can go directly and talk to. I'm worried that if we go to too many at-large representatives, they might all come from one area. We won't have control over that. So that's just something I wanted to put out there to see if council wanted to discuss. But I'm fine going with this map, and I don't feel like I need to get into any detailed manipulation. I think the goal that staff is working towards here makes sense.
I would only say, if I had a couple points, I would say maybe Ward 3 should extend to the river and encompass the confluence, because right now there's no population really to speak of in that confluence area, but it kind of makes that river a nice boundary. I'd also say the same for Ward 5. to extend, I'm sorry, Ward 4, Paula's ward, to extend to the river like it is now. That would be my only questions. And then I'd have one, I guess, for Ingrid is, do you feel like for your ward, are you Ward 2? Ward 2,
Yep.
does that encompass, I mean, Ward 1 goes all the way west, but I guess there's no housing really past like Lowe's at this point. So,
Mhm.
um,
Well, I think that mine goes to the county line is really currently what it's doing. So it
Right.
exempts Western Hills, it exempts everything over from Center Drive that's in the county and and then it also doesn't currently include the pasture owned by the demos, because obviously that's up in the air about whether it'll be annexed and what the density will be if it is.
gotcha. Charlie.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to be able to look at this map, blow it up so I can understand the streets and stuff like that. I'm looking at the one online, the current one versus this, and I think I understand where things are moving. You know, your idea of moving Ward 3 over to include the confluences probably makes sense. I doubt seriously we're gonna have significant population growth in the confluence area in the next 10 years. I think in Ingrid's area, there is a potential for her to grow depending on what happens with the vote in May, and or what happens at the mall if even if the vote in May does overturn the area, because I think everyone believes the mall will be some kind of a mixed use development. So, you know, I think your ideas on Ward 4 and 3 moving to the river makes sense unless it really messes with the population. Because Ward 3, I agree, is not going to change much beyond what it is. Ward 4, Paul, you're going to be getting the Bell Rippey people in, which will increase your numbers up probably closer to what there is in Ward 3. Ward 1 will add as we get into the other. And Jonathan, I didn't look at you. I forgot. Can we drop down so I can see the population on 5?
Jen, can we scroll down?
Numbers control you back.
Thanks.
There we go. Thanks. Yeah. So Jonathan, you're there, and there's the potential for further growth out in the Cardiff area. I think depending what probably not until Southbridge gets built. So anyway, I'm otherwise comfortable with it. My only other suggestion is again, I know next meeting is we got 2 people gone. If we take this up in the March 1st,
Yeah.
the first meeting in March,
We can get it done in the first
I
meeting
think
in
that makes
March.
more sense.
Yeah.
Because we might have the new person will be on board then as well. So we'll have all 7 of us. So I would say this would be taken up on that March 2nd or whatever that first meeting in March is, and that lets all 7 of us talk about it. But otherwise, good job, people. I'm surprised that it was so easy. I know it wasn't from your perspective, but it looks easy from our perspective.
And real quick, does Ward 5 now encompass Cottonwood Landings as well?
Yes, I believe, or no, I think if you can zoom in, Jen, I think it breaks on 27th Street. Yeah.
And that might be just one more suggestion, because I think, you know, as Charlie said, I think, well, I don't know if he said it or not, but I think Ward 5 probably is not going to have a lot of growth, but I think that there is, you know, with all the approvals and the current construction with the lofts, I think, you know, we might be looking forward a little bit on Ward 1, I think Ward 1. So there might be a sense, because those Cottonwood Landing and the terraces, I just really want to be Deborah's representative. That's really all this is about.
Yeah, no, and what I would say is that I think we break on a census tract there. And so unless there's a real issue with population, Jonathan probably would like to leave it the way it is.
Fine.
You know, I also like, frankly, the other thing that goes on with this is making it easy both for the city clerk to know where the ballots go. And also when we need to do anything with a coordinated election, which typically doesn't involve the wards, but occasionally might, it's really nice to have easily identifiable landmarks that are associated with where we break. So like I like 27th Street because it's easy to know you're either on the north side or the south side, right?
Except the terraces, which are on both sides.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not perfect all the time. It's just one of those things that, like, I recognize that it can be really hard on the election officials.
Well, on that note, I think that's another good reason to go to the river on Ward 4 and Ward 3. It kind of easily defines it, especially if not only as a keeping it all in the same neighborhood, but also just as the population in general going, well, what ward am I in? Well, you're in Ward 1, but you're just on a little sliver of the river and then it's Ward 4 or Ward 3. I mean, just kind of that general picture of telling people their wards.
Okay.
Any other questions, thoughts on this map? Cool,
Just a
thanks.
question on Ward 1, though, with Paula's comment, if that's not where the census line breaks, does that make sense? Just
We'll
to,
take a look at it. And I mean, I think there may be some places where we break from the census line. I think we included that probably more. It may be in its own census tract, given that neighborhood. I'm not sure. Do you know, Jen?
Sorry, I just know that there are two different pieces that are right here. And I remember when Jenny clicked on it, it was a lot of people. Because we had tried to, Carl and I had the same inclination. So I think I just need to ask Jenny, how many people it is. And we can bring another round of this, but some of the things that you asked, we asked, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising because what you don't realize is because of the neighborhood, there's actually a pretty high population number in that little sliver back. I can't point at the screen, but in that ward between the river right there, there's actually the density is pretty high in there.
Yeah, I'm kind of walking
anyway,
through
so we'll come back with kind of a couple of those modifications and see what we can do. But this gives you nothing is changing wholesale, obviously. I did ask for a map that I wanted the 5 points to be each one of you guys' residents, and I was going to draw you all into one district just for fun. And then maybe de-annex Shelley and Tony, but everybody told me that was getting a little too a little too much gerrymandering. But anyway.
When you go on hour number 3 of staff time to make a funny, that just might be.
Yeah, it just seemed like it might be asking, going a little bit too far. Anyway, so that's great. So I like you said, it seems easy at this end, and I really want to thank Jenny and doing all this work in the background. All right, so with that, I guess, Jen, if you want to give us all back to being big people, and I really didn't provide a ton of information. Actually, I thought my memo was going to be back in the packet, and we just missed that. Anyway, those two big questions I really think are, what is the structure of council? Do you guys want to look at an elected mayor? And then the other question being, do you want to look at an instant runoff or a ranked choice voting, or any of those things to deal with kind of outcomes of elections, regardless of structure of council?
If I can, Tony, apologize for interrupting. I know you got your hand up, but the third thing you put in was a procurement code. To me, that's a no-brainer. I think we ought to do that. That ought to take it out of the charter and go into the ordinances. So unless we disagree, I think that's an easy one. I apologize for popping that ahead, but you didn't talk about that.
Right. So let's start with that one because it is a little bit easier, Charlie. So in the early 2000s, we had a charter amendment that moved the procurement number from 5,000 for competitive bidding up to 25,000. And we have a much more sophisticated procurement department now, and kind of how we approach all of this. And so one of my questions was, does it make more sense for council to set that via ordinance on a whatever basis they want to, so they won't have to keep going back and changing the charter? It's just a cleanup that I think, whether we do it now or we do it at the regular municipal election, I think there is some value there in that cleanup. What do you guys think?
I talk, Jonathan?
Yeah,
You're
well,
here.
yes.
I didn't want to
yes,
interrupt you.
No, absolutely. I think we're just, if we could just get kind of a head, I didn't see a lot of head nods on kind of
Well,
the general.
I just
theme.
wanted to talk briefly about IRB. I was working, Carl, in the district attorney's office when you know who was up in Aspen fighting IRB.
Right.
I don't remember what the timing of Mr. Gamba is, and I certainly respect that he thinks that this would be a great idea. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. And it failed miserably in Aspen and they got rid of it. And I hate it. If you guys don't know what instant runoff voting is, you like rank. So if there were like 8 people running for Charlie's seat, there's an automatic runoff if no one gets a certain percentage. Aspen has a runoff vote because they have so many people running in for the seats, but it's just a terrible idea. My other thing is, I think when we're looking at the charter, like when they're looking at the Constitution, we should do it in as much a holistic way as we can, in that, you know, changing little parts is nice, but I think it's time to even have a committee, not like a constitutional convention, but something like that, where we look at the entire document. And, you know, this is an older document. If you go through it, there are some things that never envisioned Zoom meetings and electronic meetings and all the new things that we have. And maybe it's time to look at the whole thing. With regards to the direct voting to mayor, I'm going to defer to, you know, Mr. Willman and others who are more passionate about that. I've always thought that that might be a good idea, but maybe that's something the voters are obviously going to have to decide. But please trust me, stay away from IRB. You're just going to put Carl in court for years. That's my joke, Carl.
I appreciate that. How do you, so if I can summarize on, you'd rather take a look at the whole thing than like adjust the procurement provision right now?
No, well, the procurement provision, you know, if there's things that are urgent and that need to be addressed right now, but I think if we're going to redo the charter, let's redo the charter, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, okay, got it. So I think there was generally a head nod that if it does make sense potentially to adjust the charter on the procurement. I don't actually know if I want to mix that in with this special election or not, but it's just one of those questions that I do think is important. And I think it would, like I said, it would simplify things a little bit for everybody. If we want to step back, do you want to do mayor or instant runoff or runoff voting first?
Well, I think Tony brings up a point. If we're going to have, if there is a desire to look at the charter holistically, are we going to take out, you know, are we going to make the decision on instant runoff voting, procurement, popular elected mayor, or are we going to give this charter review committee, hey, here's some things that have come up, here's some things we've thought about, where's all the other horse and a gun after you get out of jail type stuff that needs to be cleaned up in our charter? So I guess before we kind of go and start picking off little things here and there, do we want to have a discussion about a holistic charter review? And if we do, then are there things that we want to take out of that? So
yeah, and I guess I would say before you start that, I would just frame it up in terms of like sort of time. I would view that as something, given everything else that's on our plate and your plate, that would be something to take a look at in probably third or more than likely fourth quarter 2022, just because you got some big stuff coming up. So just because I totally agree, like there's modernizing the charter would be nice. I'll be honest. A lot of advantages there.
okay.
Carl, I apologize. Would you repeat that last statement? I missed it.
Just that I think that realistically, in terms of time and what's on everybody's plates, and the things we're asking out of the community comp plan, housing, you know, we're eating up a lot of community like involvement and resources right now. I think, you know, fourth quarter of this year would probably be realistically when that would feel like we would get to a charter commission. It's you know, it's an undertaking, and people are passionate about charter. When you say the word charter, you'd be surprised how excited.
It was that sense of passion. I thought there was something else. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with what Tony brought up too. I'd rather not do little one-offs, because it seems like we're just putting Band-Aids on an old charter. If there are good templates out there that you could bring to us, Carl, or from other cities that have similar structure that we could modernize and bring our charter up to date, I think that would be the best way to go, and put it to a citizen ad hoc group. Maybe we can pull from FAB, we can pull from different areas, different boards, or and solicit others. But I agree, let's put it off till after the comp plan. That makes total sense. We have a lot going on right now. And I feel the same way about the, do we elect a mayor? Do we change the structure of council? I feel like those things should come more from the citizens, and I'd rather hear from them than just council making those decisions. But I had a question for you, Carl. You mentioned in your memo changes to align with state constitutional and statutory provisions. Are there things in there where we are out of alignment?
Only things that just make Ryan's life miserable, because the charter, the charter one-offs, a couple of things, and it does control over state statute on those things related to elections in particular.
Because we're home
just
rule.
from the, because we're home rule. Just for, simplicity's sake and ease of making sure that elections run smoothly, and things like petitions run smoothly. There are just some changes that we would probably, they're not urgent, but they are
Right.
changes and updates that we would like to make to just kind of smooth that up. And one of those actually are things like recalls, the timeline, well, and all the election things. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get on, but because of Unicaba, the overseas votes, and when you have to mail and when you count, a lot of our charters don't reflect the actual timelines that work for when we have to do things. So like literally you have to mail ballots before people, the names of people to put on the ballots. So we'd like to fix those kinds of things in the event they come up. They're not critical right now. We don't have an issue with any election coming up, but we just want to make sure we're prepared because,
Yeah, right. That would be great. And again, I agree with Tony. Let's do it all as a package.
Real quick, Carl, one time when we talked about, sorry, Ingrid, it's just a point of order, but Carl, one time we were talking, this was Gamba's council, and it came up, and you said, we can't, not that we can't, because we can do anything with enough time and money, but it'd be very difficult to do ranked choice voting or instant runoff because the county's election systems weren't set up for it. Is it different now, or would we do this and it'd be like, oh crap, we got to come up with a lot of money to run our own elections?
The latter one.
Oh, okay. And do you have?
Yeah, and what I was going to suggest is, because I actually agree with Tony on this, I've been in a fair amount of ranked choice litigation. And I really, if you were looking for a way to address multiple candidates and pluralities, I would actually just suggest that you make the charter amendment that, the top two candidates, in the event nobody gets a majority, the top two candidates are placed in a runoff election to be held, whatever, a month after or something like that. Much less likely to be challenged, and much less voter confusion over who they're voting for. The difficulty with ranked choice is that it creates a lot of confusion in the electorate. I mean, you wouldn't think that it would, and I know that it shouldn't, but it does. And simplicity in voting is super important.
So just real quick, and I'm sorry, Ingrid, but I just want to, if we wanted to pursue this, because I think this might inform it, what would be the cost? What would be,
right.
If you're talking like $100,000 and like 100 hours of extra labor, then my thought on this might be slightly different. So
right. No, and I think that's exactly. And I specifically didn't bring all that to get in the weeds today. It was more at this high level, and slowly working our way down from 50,000 feet to 10,000 feet, if you will. Because like you said, with enough time and money, you can do anything. But I just engaged in everything that we were trying to avoid this morning, so I apologize for that.
That's no problem. Sorry. Thanks, Ingrid. Appreciate your patience.
I have just a couple questions, and that is the time frame. So obviously, there's quite a few variables that have to come together in the event that a focus group in the fourth quarter says this is something that they want to do. Then what would that look like, and when would we potentially see charter changes? Would it impact next April's election at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. It depends on how extensive of a revision. I have seen charter commissions to renew a charter take anywhere from a couple of months to a year. So it may be that it doesn't impact spring 2023 at all, and we put it on, either on a special election or, spring of 24 in between the two at a special election, something like that. I think it's one of those things that you may not want to, it may be appropriate to have its own election on the adoption of it.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was just my only question.
Sorry, thanks for that. Paula, go ahead.
Ingrid asked my first question, and then I remembered another question. Carl, how does this, going back to the first part of our conversation, how would this, all of these kind of things came up with, would we change the wards? Would we, remove the wards if we do rank voting, et cetera, et cetera? Do we go through this whole process again with Jen if we change the charter and we go to rank voting? I'm not even saying what it is, but does
we would
city staff have to do all that?
Yeah, we would holistically. If you look, if you're kind of a charter wonk a little bit, if you look back at the charter, there's still language about when it was first adopted, how terms were going to fall and all that kind of stuff. And we would just need to address all of that so that if an updated charter were adopted, it would include the changes to the wards. If there were, like, if we went from 5 to 4 or none.
Okay.
And then, whose terms would expire when that was currently sitting, we would just have to address all that so that it flowed through, so that presumably within 2 years of adoption, we would be running fully underneath whatever the new structure was.
And would those decisions be based, if there were changes to wards, be based on 2020 census figures or wherever we're at with population? Because we just talked about all this potential.
Yeah, we could do. We could do either one to the extent that we knew what those population changes were. Absolutely. There's nothing. We're working underneath the current version of the charter, which says you should be looking at these things at this interval. And so, if we're revamping the charter, we would look at the world then. Because you're literally adopting either an amended and restated or a new charter, however you want to look at it. So,
okay, thanks. I'm fine with going in that direction of an ad hoc committee. Just my comments.
Okay, I think that we got about 7 minutes to then address the popularly elected mayor one. And I guess the first question is, if we want to do an ad hoc, do we want to include that portion in the ad hoc, or do we want to have a conversation? Charlie wants to have the conversation now. So, okay, what are people's thoughts?
My nod was, no, let's do it all together. Because if we get into elected mayor, may change wards, we may be doing different things, depending on the mayor votes, doesn't vote, all those kind of things. So I think it's got to be part of that general work that we're going to do this at the end of the year. I just makes sense. And I think it also allows us to get more citizen feedback on mayor versus non-mayor. I hear lots of people say we need an elected mayor, and if they truly want that, and that's what the overall citizens want to do, then we got to go there. I go back and forth on whether I think it's a good idea based on my experience of working with the city over the years. I work with the city, but that's why I think it's an important thing to get more input from the citizens, and we don't have time to get that done and get to the spring election. But I thought we ought to have this discussion just in case, which is why I pushed to get this done this meeting.
So we say, just point of reference, Charlie, you said the spring election, you're talking about the May 3rd election that we have on the books right now, the special election? Or the spring?
Okay. Yeah, kept hitting the wrong button. I don't think, originally I thought if we want to do an elected mayor, we should probably put it on the ballot in the May election this year, May of 2022. I think we need more, we need to vet it more. We need to see whether that makes sense and have the public weigh in on elected versus appointed, or maybe some hybrid of that where the mayor serves a year and rotates like Delta or Montrose does. I think those are all options that this ad hoc committee can look at, rather than us saying, well, we think it ought to be elected, or do you want to vote for elected versus the other? I think it's part of the overall let's check, we're gonna look at the charter as a total unit, then we ought to do that too at the same time.
And so just for timing wise, if we're working back from the nearest regular municipal election, which would be April of 23, Carl, you said, not trying to use your words against you or anything, but you said something like, if we're going to do this, it'd be third or fourth quarter. And in theory, you've seen people do these in as little as a couple of months. If we wanted to do something in September, potentially, or I don't know, an ad hoc committee in order to put it on, say, a November of 2022 regular ballot, then in theory, if we wanted to have these changes, like specifically popularly elected mayor or different wards or things like that, that could go on the regular municipal election of April of 23. Or if that's a little quick for everybody, everything we have, can we do a special election in January for that 20? And I'm not racing to try to get this in.
No, and that's, I mean, we have all that flexibility. Here's what I would say is that, redrafting a charter is like redrafting the Constitution, right? And so what my biggest suggestion is, don't rush it, right? Because you're creating really a core guiding document that can't be changed unless the voters do. That, we adopted this charter in 1965. And so you have to think about it really as a 50-year or 75-year document. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important, if we're going to undertake it, to let it decide when it goes to a ballot, not artificially trying to get it there. That's kind of my thought, but obviously we'll do whatever you guys direct. We can always hold the election whenever we want to. It's the bottom line.
What are people's thoughts on it? Because I think, the next time after that would be April of 25. And again, I don't care and I want to rush things, but I think if we have an idea that we want, at least a majority of this council wants to go to that system, then I think we need to kind of backdate at least that answer, if not the entire charter. So in that way, this might be something that's separate from the whole charter review. So I don't, again, go ahead, Shelley.
Are you asking specifically about the elected mayor?
I think I am. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I think I would like some clarity as far as, if people want an elected mayor in April of 23, that might be a decision that, we just take public comment. We talk amongst ourselves. We, do something like that in order to make that change. And obviously what we're talking about tonight, the ward map would need to change as well. But then all the other stuff on that 50-year would be a more deliberative process.
And I would rather not go that way. I'd rather, again, I like Carl's advice. Let's take our time. If we have a charter from 1965, it's about time for an update and a modernization. And rather than putting Band-Aids on it and changing little things here and there, I like the idea of taking our time, doing it right. And, maybe others have had a different story, but I have not felt a groundswell of residents coming to me and saying, we want to elect the mayor. And without that coming from the citizenry, I'd rather have it be part of the whole charter change, and let's take the city forward from there.
The charter's as old as me, Mr. Mayor. Almost exactly.
Oh, goodness.
I was 16 years old when this passed, so I'm older than all you guys. So.
Go ahead, Paula.
I see what Carl is saying about taking our time, but I also become concerned about sometimes these times turn into 2, 4, 5 years. And I think us giving it some parameters is actually a good idea. Yes, take some time, but really kind of at least give it some structure of, we want a committee looking at it in August and come back to us in July or come back to us in March or something, if we're going to put everything on hold. I have heard some feedback on electing a mayor, not a huge amount, but it definitely has come up in conversations. No offense, Jonathan, it's just people are always ready to change things. And I just think that, it's responsive of us on our end to say, look, we're addressing it. And it isn't just something that, we tag along with for years, because I've seen that happen in some of our processes.
All right, we have a time limit, but I have 2 more hands up. So if we can be brief for our last comments, that would be appreciated. Go ahead, Ingrid.
I would say that I have heard quite a bit of feedback about electing a mayor. Just, I think, more the nuances of how we do it, not necessarily a criticism of who we've had as mayor in past. But I've heard that we're a town that's large enough to do it. So while I think that the charter certainly does need to be looked at and addressed and updated, and I completely honor Carl's timeframe for that, don't want to rush it, I think that getting feedback to see if there's enough support within the community to change how the mayor is appointed or elected, we could maybe be doing that on the front end via a focus group. So that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see some energy. And I agree with Shelley that it shouldn't come from council, even if we're the ones who get that feedback. I'd love to hear it come from community members. And so we do have some great people on boards and commissions that are very finger on the pulse in the community. So I'd love to have that focus group come together and see if there's a support or even a dialogue. And then we can maybe keep those people moving forward to evaluate any charter changes. But I think that's going to take a while. If there's a momentum to do an elected mayor, then I think that would need to integrate very much into the charter change. So it's almost like step 1 of 2.
Charlie. Thanks, Ingrid.
Just a question, I think, Carl, do we have to engage a charter commission? Is that what we do? I was looking at the approval at the bottom of the charter online.
It is. There's a process. And so here's a couple of suggestions in terms of process. One, I think I need to get you guys, I didn't anticipate, which I guess I should have, that you guys would want to take a look at the whole charter. And so I can get you a memo on that, on just what process with the Charter Commission looks like. There are some statutory requirements as well to amend it. And then and I guess built into that is sort of what that proposed or potential timeline might look like. I don't know quite what to do with the sort of the one-off with the mayor thing. And I think maybe Ingrid can provide some guidance tonight on the dais. But as far as the Charter Commission goes, I can get you a memo in the next month, knowing that we're not going to like form one tomorrow, that would anticipate sort of end of summer, beginning of the school year, because I think there again, trying to do anything in August is just a bad time for a wide variety of reasons.
So can I make a suggestion to move us along? I think I'm hearing summary of we want a larger look, a holistic look at our charter. I think that there's enough opinions that maybe the elected mayor position be contemplated, whether we end up putting it as part of the commission or whether we take it on and try to get feedback separate. I would suggest, since we're pretty skin and bones on the February 17th meeting, that maybe by the March 3rd, I think it's March 3rd meeting, right. We'll have another council person elected, another voice that might have a different opinion or additional to add. At that meeting, whether it's on the dais or another work session, I would love to hear, Ingrid said, I think you said, Ingrid, like, hey, we're a city big enough now. I would love to see, what do other cities do? What do other communities do? Bigger, smaller, weak mayor, strong mayor. I think it's a conversation worth having, and maybe on May 3rd, or March 3rd, excuse me, the only thing we get out of that is, yeah, let's refer to these guys. But I think I need a little bit more information on who does what and how it works out before I would be really ready to even not put it towards this.
Yeah. So maybe what we should do is have that on the regular agenda, Jonathan, so that you guys can give some clear direction with a vote. So if I'm hearing correctly, we're going to have two things. I'm going to have a memo on the Charter Commission for you guys to look at. And the other one is we'll do a summary of what similarly sized communities are doing in Colorado currently with the mayor position.
And I would say bigger communities, like, bigger communities and small, like just kind of like, what do people do in the valley and the state?
Right. Okay. Yeah. And we can do that. I mean, that's relatively easy. We can have that on the agenda for you.
We're a medium-sized community for CML. I don't know if that would be, some of the medium-sized are pretty damn big, but I mean, I think there may be an area that.
Yeah, no, I've got a pretty good sense of what the comparables would be to pull from.
Is everybody okay with that kind of general time frame? And
And
Okay.
you're going to send us a link to the charter or something? I know I could dig and dig and dig, but.
Yeah, it's on it's one click off the main webpage on cogs.us.
If you look at the bottom of the webpage, Paula, there's a thing that says code. And if you click on that, the first thing is a charter.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Saves me at least a half an hour.
Okay. Anything else? We're only 5 minutes behind. Next, move study, pedestrians and bicycle improvement plan. Who do I need to bring over? Do I need to bring over anybody? I'd love to bring over Terry.
You've got no audio, Deborah.
Jonathan, I can hear you. Say something.
I love Tony. He is my favorite city council person.
That didn't come through. Say it again for the record.
I am assuming you need to bring Terry over if she's hanging out there.
I'm thinking so.
And poor Deborah is like, the technology is just not treating her well. Nope, nothing.
Anybody else in the attendees, raise your hand if you want to be brought over. I see Brian Smith hanging out. I don't know if you want to be brought over. You know what? I'm not going to bring Brian over. No, forget you, Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're going to look at the pedestrian and bicycle improvement plan from the MOVE study. It's just a work session, so we're not really expecting you to have a vote on it yet. I'll explain it, and then I can answer some questions and also go over the Transportation Commission, feelings and recommendations on it. So as you guys are aware, with the MOVE study, it was broken up into probably 5 different pieces, and one of the pieces was this pedestrian and bicycle improvements plan. Can I share a screen? I'm going to bring up a map of kind of showing what we were working on here. Can you guys see the phase 1 improvements map? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I'm sorry.
Yes, we've had this problem in the past, right? This is kind of these are the low dollar improvements, essentially in the 10 to 50K range. They made the recommendations that we, first of all, focus on maintenance, winter maintenance, especially of our sidewalks and trails. But, they also recommended improved wayfinding, some at the RAFTA station, adding short-term and long-term bicycle storage, improving the wayfinding at the roundabouts, adding better defined east and west bike routes, particularly at 8th and 12th and 14th. There were some connections on 12th Street that have also been on the small projects list for the Transportation Commission that they recommended that we adjust to, just transitions from curb to the path. And improvement of multimodal access to from the downtown to the Rio Grande Trail and the Meadows Trails. It's specifically wayfinding. So those are some of the phase 1 improvements. I'm going to kind of scale through and show you the next map of the phase 2 improvements. Sorry for making you dizzy. Oh, I just missed it. So phase 2 improvements were in the $50K to $1 million range. We we were looking at the connection or the 27th Street grade separations, which actually just went back out to bid on Friday. Improving the connection from the Rio Grande Trail to 27th, as well as the grades around the roundabout. As many of you know, probably Deborah knows best, some of these are sharp grades into the roundabout, and we've talked about putting RRFBs there to try to alert people to that pedestrian crossing. In addition, they recommended improving the off-street bicycle routes to make them wider, adding, at least a 10-foot wide trail. So those were some of the phase 2 improvements that they recommended. And then finally, let me try and bring up the phase 3 map. These were some of the larger improvements, the $1 million plus improvements that they recommended. So the connection at 23rd has always been a problem for pedestrians. Drivers have to look over their shoulder to actually see the approaching bicyclists. So try to adjust that intersection or, somehow separate the bike movement there. Improve the Rio Grande Trail environment. If a BRT facility goes along the Rio Grande Trail, there was the idea that they would widen it to at least 10 feet. Improve the crossings of the Rio Grande Trail and the connections at 12th and 14th and at 8th. Continued evaluation of transit stops and destinations through our corridors here along Grand Avenue, and then improving our sidewalk widths again. So those are some of the larger things that they recommended. Do you guys have any questions about the improvements that were recommended?
Charlie, then Paula.
Harry, I think I saw an earlier version of the transportation report that was fairly inadvertent and taken down. I don't think it's in the current one. Is concerns about making 8th and 14th cross connections. To me, I think that is a valid concern. You can't put bicycle traffic on A Street. You'd end up with a lot of dead bicyclists, and I think on 14th is kind of the same thing. So my curiosity is why are those put into the move study as being potential crossing areas?
Mostly because they're well used. We have a lot of pedestrians already that are on the 8th Street corridor and crossing there. So one of the ideas that has occurred in previous plans, transportation plans, is the idea of changing 8th and 9th to a couplet, and then trying to change the sections so that there are bike paths that are associated with those roads. I think that that's just one idea of how to improve, that connection and make the pedestrian movement more prominent through there. I think 14th probably needs a little bit of work, but at one point, and it's still actually in our corridor optimization plan, there was a bridge connection from Midland across to 14th, and then this becomes a major route both for vehicles and for pedestrians. The high schools there and City Market and the access to CMC. So I do think that even though there are high volumes on Grand Avenue, that it's worth looking at these intersections and trying to figure out how we can improve our pedestrian crossings. I think they exist today, and I think we need to find come up with some ideas to make it better and safer.
I agree with that pedestrian. I guess my question was bicyclists. I don't think those are either of those should be bicyclists crossing. I think we should be looking at 7th and 11th or one of those instead for bicycles. Anyway, sorry. Not a questions and comments. I'll stop.
No, thank you. Paula?
Yeah, my question was really similar, and I'm speaking as a bicyclist. I don't think I'd ever go up 14th Street, but somewhere in the packet, Terry, it mentioned not using 14th, but maybe 15th, which I believe is kind of a dead street going by the other side of City Market. Is that not the case? When I read that, I kind of went, wait, I thought we took 15th off of our responsibility as a city.
It's the signal is still there. Obviously, it's one of those important signals for the City Market business. But the reason why I think it remains important from a pedestrian standpoint is really because of the high school. I feel like there's a pretty a large volume of kids that cross there, both in the morning and in the afternoon. And at one point, we have talked at various different times about trying to perhaps propose some grade separation projects. I think if we were going to do grade separation projects, I think the first one I would propose would be at the Safe Routes to School, which is actually on 10th Street, to try to bring those kids across as safely as we could. But we've also, Jen and I and others recently met on 12th Street, and we do have that grade separation of the highway there. It's a debris flow channel, but it can be, I think, improved as well, and an additional grade separated access there. So I think that those are some ideas that we should pursue, I guess, in the future as we're up for more expensive grade separations.
And just one more thing, I make my own interpretation for couplet. Could you redefine that for me? Because I think it means one thing and then you say something and I'm like, oh, it doesn't mean what I thought it meant.
No, thanks for asking. In a couple different transportation plans, actually, it went at some point, I'm going to bring this element of the MOVE study back to you, but for operational purposes and for safety purposes, they recommend an 8th and 9th Street couplet. And what that means is that, and it can be either direction. 8th Street goes to westbound only, and then 9th Street is eastbound only, and then the signals operate, with that cycle in mind. And we take out a signal cycle. It allows for more time at the signals, if we want to have better movement from one of our side streets. It also would allow for a better section, on 8th and 9th both, in terms of, sharing the road with vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles. We could, take out one of our directions of our vehicle movements and expand the platform for our pedestrians. So it essentially, couplet just means that it is a one way, and the 8th becomes east-west or east, and the 9th becomes west, and they could be switched opposite. We can talk about it, but that's what a couplet means.
Thank you.
Oh,
And Terry, didn't we have some of that operating a little bit as a couplet during the Grand Avenue Bridge project? Or was it just on the west side? Because
they did change the signal timing, and it was 8th Street was for a block was one direction going westbound. They tried to, they called it a square about. They wanted us to move off of 9th and have 8th go westbound.
okay,
So 9th,
right.
yeah.
It helped the traffic move. I would like to see us at least explore that couplet idea, because I do think it would make it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians downtown, and the traffic would get used to it and flow. We already kind of have that couplet with Cooper and Colorado going north and south. So to me, I think that could work well.
Yeah, I'll bring more information back to you guys with the vehicular analysis, because I think that those ideas are in there, and then I think it also helps to relieve congestion in the future, and so looking at some of the future levels of service and congestion, I think would help with that discussion.
Okay, and is there any talk about making more of a traffic calming at the 23rd Street intersection, mainly, from the traffic coming from Glen Avenue, like headed north, just because a lot of times they're coming in, it's a completely different street until you reach 23rd. And then all of a sudden you're on Main Street, Grand Avenue, and it's slower speeds. And it's, so I don't know if there's a way we can look at a physical way to slow that traffic down before they get to 23rd Street so that we can make that intersection safer for bikes and pedestrians. But just a kind of a question, but an idea there also.
Yeah, you know, with the access control plan that we did with the state, they, you know, we did 2 different alignments of trying to change that configuration of that intersection and make it a little bit safer. You know, we've also looked at different alternatives with the BRT. You know, if the BRT were to use the Rio Grande Trail as a route, there we had some ideas there. So, you know, when I bring those elements back, we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right.
The Transportation Commission did make some suggestions and recommendations. I don't know if you guys had a chance to review them, but if you'd like, I can kind of do a quick summary of the Transportation Commission recommendations. Yes. Okay. So overall, they said that they thought, you know, the observations were are accurate and well described. They did think that there were some inadequacies at different locations in terms of the infrastructure network, including inadequate or non-existing sidewalks. So perhaps we missed a few things. They did say that the phased outline includes a useful list of needed improvements, but the list is not complete and needs to be better integrated with the city's transportation capital projects priority rankings. And then they also followed that with, we should clarify responsibility for funding and implementation of the plan. So I guess what I would say to close this is that if you guys adopt the pedestrian recommendations here, what we would do with this is bring it back to the Transportation Commission and probably try to wrap it into the large and small projects list. And then those would come back to you as recommendations during the budget cycle. So those were kind of the highlights of the Transportation Commission. And if you guys have any additional questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Wow, we got back on time. You can always count on Terry to bring us back in line.
Let me get out of here. I'll let you guys go back to the big view.
All right. Youth mental health.
I am guessing that Jen or Deborah, and Deborah's still having technical difficulties.
I think it's Deborah. Let me see, and she can come use my computer. So hold on just a second.
And I think we need Anna Cole and Stephanie to be popped over. And Jamie too.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
And I see, yep, Jamie Hayes is here as well from Youth Zone. So I don't know if there's like any context or you want us to just jump on in. You go for it.
Go for it. Knock yourself.
All right. Well, cool. Well, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Anna Cole and I'm the Chief of Student and Family Services for the Roaring Fork Schools. So a lot of my work is around the kind of non-academic side of working with kids and families in our schools. I was, met with a lot of you about a little over a year ago as the city of Glenwood Springs invested some funding in some work that we're doing to increase access for students to mental health services in the schools. And so here again today to kind of give some updates on that work, talk about how we're trying to expand that program. This is part of a larger ask that's kind of between us and our Roaring Fork Schools and Youth Zone, one of our real critical partners in increasing access for youth to mental health services. And so I wonder, Jamie, if you want to introduce yourself so folks can see where you are as well. What did we just lose?
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah? All right, awesome. I can hear myself echoing. Hold on. There's two of us on this call. Stephanie's here. I'll let her introduce herself in just a second. I'm Jamie Hayes, the Executive Director at Youth Zone. And as Anna said, Roaring Fork School District is also one of our critical partners. So we're excited to be here and represent one another together as a united front. So thank you for having us. We have received generous funding from the city of Glenwood for a couple of different projects. And all of those things are hard at work and fast at play right now. So we're excited to share some of that work with you too. And I'll hand it over to Stephanie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Stephanie Maurice, Grants and Data Manager over here at Youth Zone. I handle all of the data and grant writing here and crunch the numbers, do all that nerdy stuff. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon.
So our plan for today was kind of to do an overview of the work in Roaring Fork Schools and in Youth Zone. And I know it's a work session, so I think I could speak for probably both Jamie and I that we'd love for you to interrupt us and ask questions. And then maybe we can have a little bit of time. We've got about 15 slides to try to capture some of the work. Hopefully we can do that in about 10, 15 minutes and move fast because I think you all have access to the slides as well. So does that sound okay? Okay, if once I take over this screen, I won't be able to see you. So definitely it's hard to read the room. So, feel free to jump in and tell me to slow down, speak up, or if you have any questions. Okay, so this work, and some of this is going to sound familiar because we talked a little bit about this last year, is, we're really trying to ensure that all of our kids, especially for this team, for all of our kids in Glenwood Springs have access to evidence-based mental health services at all levels, prevention, what we can do before there's an issue, intervention, and then treatment and response. And we're really about strengthening positive youth development by making sure kids have access to services. This is very wordy, but I just want you to see that when we think about mental health services, we think about prevention as stuff we do for everybody. Sometimes we call it tier 1. Intervention is stuff we do for some people, some kids, and then therapy and treatment would be what we do for a small group of kids. And so there's a lot that we do when it comes to mental health that is all sorts of levels that we do inside the schools. That's preventative, that's interventional, that's also kind of that treatment therapy. But there comes a time in mental health, I think, that we've learned, especially over the last few years doing this kind of work, where as educators, it's not our area of expertise to do the mental health, some of the interventional mental health work that organizations like Youth Zone, that Hope Center do. We've learned that we need to partner instead of to provide those direct services. But our real benefit as a schools is that we've got the kids. And so it's easier to get to them if we can integrate those services with schools and increase access that way. And so what we've learned over many years of piloting different projects through funding like the City of Glenwood Springs last year is that by having school-based community mental health providers, meaning they work at school, but they're from community partners, so they're from the outside. What we're able to do when we blend funding and partnerships to do that is that we see that kids have increased access to mental health services. We see increased alignment between what's happening in schools and the services kids are getting in and outside of school. And that we're seeing that there's more of a streamlined connection between what's happening with the services in school. And then, especially if kids need to have more of a lifetime relationship with mental health, we're able to increase those referrals and processes even better by having these partnerships. When we originally got into this work, we partnered with a lot of different community mental health providers. We've worked with Mind Springs, we've worked with Hope Center. And over time, even those organizations have decided we're in the school-based mental health business or we're not. Mind Springs really stepped out of that work over the last year or so, and Hope Center's really expanded and invested in their school-based partnerships. One of the other benefits that we see as a school district to letting community partners hold this kind of work is that, frankly, Hope Center does a better job recruiting mental health providers than we do as a school district. We know that's really hard in our community, is to recruit and retain mental health providers, and just having an organization that's dedicated to that, they get better candidates than we do as a school district when we're hiring for that type of work. We also see that those providers who are really doing those tier 3, those really specialized services, have better professional support by being part of the Hope Center versus Roaring Fork Schools. And then we also see that they're a great partner for us in crisis, which unfortunately, given the current context, we are seeing more. And we consider crisis kind of the suicide and threat are really the issues that we pull in the Hope Center to partner with school leaders to make sure that we're not missing something when there's a concern for safety. Our school leaders lose a lot of sleep at night worrying about their decisions when they're seeing kids that are bubbling up and that are in crisis, that, you know, we weren't trained as educators for how to do that. So having experts from our partners work with us through that really helps. The kind of services that the Hope Center is providing in our schools is they do crisis assessment. That's huge. And those safeties assessment when we're really worried about kids. They run student meetings that they kind of categorize it as a low severity, moderate, or high level, depending on how that kid's doing and what their mental health status is right at that moment. They run family meetings. They do social emotional check-ins with kids. They run small groups. They do prevention education. And then they also work on our student support teams. So they regularly consult with our school counselors, our administrators, to make sure that we're wrapping around kids and really supporting them. So they really provide some critical services that are a real asset, we believe, to the kids' experience and success in school. Just a little bit of data that I think is kind of interesting. If, you know, the city of Glenwood Springs funded a provider in 2021 that we've split between Glenwood Springs Elementary and Sopris. And you can see that in just this school year, so from August till really December, the data, the number of touch points and one-on-one clinical services, you know, sessions that this provider has had with our students is almost at 300. And then I think it's somewhere in that 20 to 30 range of family, kind of family therapy meetings that have happened at school with this provider that the city has funded. So a real increase in access. And I didn't include the numbers, and I guess I could have now that I'm saying it, but the number of referrals that provider has made to helping families get additional access to mental health and get that warm handoff, whether it's to Youth Zone or Mind Springs or other independent providers in the community, is somewhere around 100 on the data for that provider that you all funded. And sometimes there's questions of like, well, you know, we know that we struggle with finding bilingual, bicultural mental health providers. That's a national issue. We're not unique in not having those skill sets with all our providers. But what we can see, and this is the data from Hope Center's school-based providers last school year, is that they, you know, who they were serving actually really pretty much well mirrored the diversity of our kids in Roaring Fork schools. So even though we have a lot of work to do to get more bilingual providers, knowing that nearly 60% of our kids come from Spanish-speaking homes, they're serving kids. And what we see is that because from the kids' experience, that provider looks like their school counselor, is right down the hall, looks like somebody that belongs to the school because they're there every day. We're really removing those barriers. And so for kids to get over that initial hump of getting, you know, to get access to services is really reassuring, just to see that kids are really kind of getting access to those folks. Not that language and culture isn't a barrier, it is, we need to work on it. But I think we all find that this data is really reassuring. Here is kind of our current status. If we're trying to get a community mental health provider at every school and every public school in Glenwood Springs, this is kind of where we are right now with our providers and with our funding. And so you can see that the top 3 schools, GSES, Sopris, and Yampa, that were all able to have providers through funding from the city of Glenwood Springs in 2021, that funding has expired. We have a bunch of blended funding streams that make this work. So Two Rivers Community School right now has a provider, and they're pulling together a bunch of different funding streams that aren't sustainable. Riverview has, and as well as Glenwood Springs High School, Glenwood Springs Middle, we're funding in the district through some grant funds with the Colorado Department of Education. So we're constantly trying to figure out the patchwork to make this whole system run and hit that goal of a community mental health provider at every school. and it's definitely dynamic. But that provider that in 2021, the city of Glenwood Springs provided at the 2 elementary schools, significant impact on kids and access. So that's kind of what we're here for today, is to talk about this work and ask for continued and expanded support for this effort. We certainly don't see this as the sustainable long-term solution. We're working, we're trying to work with the counties. We work with city governments all across the Roaring Fork school district footprint. We also have contributions, the city, our town council in Basalt, Carbondale all contribute to this effort. Eagle County contributes a lot to this effort. And we're hoping to kind of get Garfield to jump on board as well, and working with the other Garfield school districts to get them to support us as well. So we don't see you as our only funding stream, but certainly an important one. And I think there's a question.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks. I really like the summary, and I read all those charts ahead of time, but that really helped when you summarized it. Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is what I'm concerned about, is what's the long-term funding. This is a phenomenal program, but it's, how do we fund this? We have obviously adult mental health services that are critical in this community. What are the options that you're looking at? I know, I don't know. That's why I guess I'm asking. What are the options you're looking at for long-term funding?
Yeah, great question. Part of it, I think there's, I think the towns and the counties are an important part of the puzzle. We'd like to see Garfield County support this in a more comprehensive way. That's a piece. So I think that's always going to be a piece of the puzzle that we're hoping to have connected to the work. I certainly see, it's interesting. I've been part of the CDE grant, what we call the School Health Professionals Grant, for about 5 or 6 years now. And it's really helped us. At the beginning, it was just an effort from the state to say, hey, what would happen if we put more mental health providers in the schools? We do a lot of data collection for that grant, a lot of reporting. And what's been interesting is over time, that grant gets easier and easier for the state to approve. And so I think, I'm optimistic that we're going to see increased support from the state for this kind of work in schools because of pilot programs like this grant. So we're continually looking at that, the way that state funding works. And I think at the Colorado Department of Education level, being part of this grant and having amazing data and having these really profound numbers about impact has shown the importance of this. So I'm hoping that we're going to see more support from the state. We also, stay deeply connected to kind of our local and regional foundations as kind of backup here. Certainly the voters in the Roaring Fork School District recently approved a mill levy to increase salaries that wasn't related to health services. But there's different funding that's happening at the state level, different funding happening at local levels. So we're hoping that as the dust settles on some of this, that there'll be more funding streams for this kind of work. We definitely see, I keep an eye on the kind of trends at the national level that, we know that the pandemic has hit and that the mental health impacts were a little delayed. We thought, we all thought the first couple of months of the pandemic would hit and then we'd see the mental health impacts, and it's totally, that's been the case. And I think we're starting to see some more funding for that. So I guess my long answer is I think it's always going to be a blended hustle for us. I don't know that we're ever going to be able to get dedicated funding from the Colorado Department of Education and the way our funding streams work to pay for this particular like a service line. I do think the state is going to continually have different formations of grants to support it that we'll do the hustle for, because I think we've really seen that this, what looks like a very, it's kind of simple, a community mental health provider in every school really has a huge impact.
You mentioned Garfield County, and there are no RE2 schools in your chart here. Are there similar services in RE2 that are going on, and does that help getting county support?
Yes, it absolutely does. And that's also part of it. It's interesting, over the last couple of years, I get to work a lot with RE2 and 16, and especially their kind of human services type sides of their work. And Jamie can speak to this too. She works, especially Aspen to Parachute. And we've seen over time, those leadership teams of the districts really also the same way we do recognize the need for mental health services. Hope Center and Youth Zone, again, Jamie can speak to Garfield County, are starting to make more inroads in those districts. And I think we're getting to a point, we can't go before Garfield County. It's better when we come collectively as the 3 school districts. I think we're pretty close to being able to do that, because I think they've seen this model grow here in the Roaring Fork Valley. They've been able to use a little bit of grant funding to get a little push in from some Hope Center providers supporting, they used to not have family resource centers like we do in the Roaring Fork schools. Now both of those districts have a family resource center through a lot of work and a lot of collaboration. So we're hoping that kind of this is a natural extension that I think they're getting more and more ready for. So I do think we're close to being able to make more of a collective ask with Garfield County. But you're right, it does need to be all 3 school districts, but we've really grown some great relationships with them. Okay, we're gonna shift over to Jamie's, unless there's more questions. Sorry, John.
No, it's okay. I got a couple hands up. One is from Deborah,
sorry.
but I still can't hear her.
Deborah is Steve Boyd, Jonathan.
I still can't, we can't hear you, Deborah.
She's
The other room.
Oh, I can just hear you. Oh, you just popped up, Deborah.
Okay.
Try
You can
again.
hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, sorry, I'm Steve Boyd. I apologize for the technology things. I just wanted to say another possible avenue for this to be funded is the access to care conversations that Garfield County has been having, it's a county-wide proposal. Don't know if it'll pass or not or what it will look like, but that is definitely something we have our eye on. And it's a little bit like a leap of faith on this because the emergency is now.
Mhm.
And if we wait for it to have a perfect plan going forward, we'll never have that. So this is something I know you guys you really enjoyed supporting the other youth services, but I know you were just a little bit frustrated that it wasn't coordinated. And I'm hoping, you guys can see the coordination in here and you can see that everybody's working together to help our kids.
Thanks, Deborah. Ingrid, then Shelley.
Hey, Jonathan, can we drop the share off so I can see other people?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Anna.
Anna, I guess more than anything, I'm hoping for a little clarity and just, I strongly believe this, but I want reinforcement from you as well, is that early school, like that elementary school intervention sets the precedent for both mental health care for the kid, but also just making sure that teachers are aware that some kids are struggling more. Because if I'm correct, the average age of school shooters is 16 and 17, and the average, the kids who are committing suicide is those older teens. So that early intervention is really where we can start helping this demographic the most by just a lifetime of more support. But I want you to reinforce that.
You're spot on, Ingrid, and you're right. All the research points to that early intervention work. And I think what's so tricky is that when we think of mental health, we think of like sitting on a couch and talking to a provider, which you're right. Like that's for a 16-year-old, that's what they're doing all day long at Glenwood Springs High School. But for the little guys, it's different, right? It's about self-awareness. It's about being familiar with your emotions, understanding how you have positive relationships with each other. We see certainly in the earlier ages, it's a lot more of the preventative work. And so, we could go into the specifics of Roaring Fork schools and all the commitments we've made to kind of early intervention, social emotional learning. But I think you're right that what's been really cool about the provider that you all funded at Glenwood Springs Elementary and Sopris is that we've started to see part of it being reduced stigma by seeing this early intervention, early connection to resources, saying, this is super normal. This is your school counselor. We just want you to check in with this person who's going to help you kind of, work through whatever that is that the kids are spinning out with. It also, that early intervention for parents to recognize, no, this is okay for your kindergartner, your first grader to be doing this, but we're going to bring you along. And, you might have seen when we look at the family services, for the K-5, a lot of them, right? Like 25% of that provider's time is working with families, whereas that goes down as the kids go up in age, where we do less with the families, more with the kid. But we know that, especially for the early intervention, it's a whole family system that we're talking about. And so it's been really cool to have a provider that's really willing to get in there and work with kids and families to do that early intervention work.
Yeah, and then the other question I have is like, when we normalize that within the schools, are we seeing, if mental health is normalized, the equivalent of physical health in elementary school, by middle school, are these services being utilized? Is there any downtime at all for these counselors and therapists who are in the middle school ages?
They're pretty busy. It's cool though to see, I think we see the normalization of it. I mean, I think in some of the last data I was looking, we've had a Hope Center provider at, say, Roaring Fork High School in Carbondale for a long time. And so what's been cool, I think in the last data, we saw that something like 30 to 40% of the student population had dropped into that office in the course of a year. And so that normalization of like, I'm going to go check in with Paula, who's at Roaring Fork High School, has really become normalized, I think, because of that early intervention, because we're talking about this earlier. The kids we're reducing, I believe, and I think we see it in the numbers, we're reducing that stigma of getting help when kids get older.
That's great. Thank you. And actually, Deborah, I have one quick question for you. When you say the time is right now, I'd love to maybe have you give us a little overview on the marijuana and tobacco tax opportunities that maybe we could implement here as well, if need be.
I don't think I understand. I'm sorry, Ingrid.
So I know historically we've always had this fund with the marijuana tax and stuff like that. And I'm hearing that I think you did a great job of explaining that it maybe is more of a county approach and there's a couple other opportunities for us. But if there is a need immediately, what are our options for funding it?
Oh, for this program, I was suggesting that we use $75,000 from the marijuana fund that was going to Mine Springs because they're out of the business, and that the balance of it come from the tobacco tax.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
Shelley. Thanks, Ingrid. Oh, Shelley, I'm sorry. I think I was trying to unmute you and I think I muted you. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thanks all of you guys, Anna and Stephanie and Jamie, for being here. Couple questions first for Deborah. So on the funding, if we use the 75 from the marijuana tax, do we still preserve the 25,000 for the community center passes for youth?
Yes, we do.
Springs? Okay, and is that still 6th grade through 12th? I think is what we were doing.
I can't quite remember the specifics on the program. I'm sure I can find that and send it to you guys.
Okay. And then if we take that money out of the tobacco tax funding, does that jeopardize the money that we've committed for the detox center at all? Does it affect that?
There will not be a cost for the detox center this year. The grant that Garfield County got was for construction, and will also fund the 4th quarter of the detox expenses. And that is all we anticipate occurring in 2022. And that's kind of why, the staff report says we can do it this year.
Great.
Next year will be a little trickier, maybe.
Okay. So that's kind of what I wanted to verify, because I really support these programs and I'm very excited. I understand how necessary the crisis management is, but I'm also really excited about the preventative, that tier 1 side of it, as you called it, Anna. So how much of this funding will go to that? Is there a time breakdown or?
That's a great question, Shelley. And I think it kind of depends on the school and what they need. At Glenwood Springs High School this year, the Hope Center providers met with I think the data was about 800 kids, which is nearly the entire population of the school, and did a suicide training, how to look at indicators, how to talk to your friends, which we would see as squarely in that prevention. And certainly and it's one of those weird areas that like a lot of our health educators don't feel super comfortable talking to kids about. And so at Glenwood Springs High School, that was a really natural fit. Those providers came in and did that training, and they had a lot of kids with that. And so we sometimes, we see that. I think in the elementary schools, we're seeing the providers sometimes push in just during like crew class when they're talking about emotions and self-regulation and providing kind of that peer support. So I think it kind of depends on the provider and the school and what they're working on. What's really cool is to have those providers at the table when they're working with kids one-on-one and talking to school counselors and talking to administrators. They can say, and this happens a lot, gosh, I have a lot of kids working on anger management. And it seems like it's that third grade. Can I get in there and work with those kids a little bit? And in fact, either that, like, let's get to everybody, or there's like these 6 kids in that third grade class. I'd like to grab them for lunch once a week. And so it's really adaptive because they're there every day and they're part of the team.
Okay, great. And I just think those programs that can build resilience in our kids, especially in those younger grades, are just so valuable. And so we're talking about funding just for a year, right, Deborah, at this point? Is there any way, or do you guys have a proposal to kind of sustain this more on an annual basis? And what would that, I'd be interested to see what would that amount be that would be an appropriate input from the city. Obviously not the dip into reserves that we're doing for this year, but a level that we could sustain through our tobacco and marijuana tax funding. But I would also like to put that challenge out to the BOCC and possibly other towns in Garfield County, that everybody pitch in together to fund these programs, that it's, we can make Glenwood Springs strong, but a lot of our kids travel up and down the valley, and they may be in different schools throughout the valley. And I do feel like this is something that the county is certainly interested in, and I'd love to see them step up and be partnerships and either match or exceed our funding. So if we could work towards that for the future, that would be wonderful.
If I could just clarify, like there is $200,000 in the 2022 budget that we put aside for youth mental health and tobacco tax, and 100 in marijuana funds as well. Now, if you take the 25 off for passes, that's still 275. So the gap isn't extreme that we're dipping into this year. That being said, the bigger problem would be is if the school district is unable to keep getting the grants they were getting. So I'm not horrifically worried about what the ask is this year, because we still have the plan to continue to wean our general fund more off of the tobacco tax. It's just if the school district can't get those other grants and it's more like a $600,000 cost, that's much harder.
Right. Okay.
So I didn't want to like imply that I was worried about this, or even for next year. The other question you had was what's going on in the community center. It's 6th through 12th grade during the school year, and then kids going into 6th and 12th grade during the summer.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Thanks.
Paula, we got about 7 minutes left. Not saying that specifically to you. I'm saying this to everybody. You just have
Paul has a bunch of questions. Jonathan, can I make just a quick comment?
I just have one question.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you for that comment, Tony.
You're welcome. You asked too many.
Jamie, you haven't really spoke to Youth Zone, and I know this was a collaborative effort, so can you address that in the less than 7 minutes minus Tony's comment?
And Anna, can you go ahead and screen share the rest of the slides? That would be super helpful. Thanks for the quick segue. So as you know, Youth Zone is actively working in the city of Glenwood, and the need is growing exponentially, as Anna mentioned. The kids and families that we serve are very reflective of the population that our school district serves in the school district. So that gives us a good sense that we're hitting the mark on equity and access. We serve about 60% of our kids are free and reduced lunch. It might be 54%. And then 60% are our Latino families. And so we feel very strong about that representation. Our community-based services are the ones you see here. We do an intake survey. We have youth advocates and we do youth coaching, mental health counseling, substance use, as you know, and you have supported and funded before, restorative justice, family mediation, groups, life skills, and we're growing in all kinds of ways for all of our folks, all of our youth advocates to be able to provide more and more services, because we're realizing that that multi-tool that our youth advocates carry around needs to get bigger and bigger, and our people need to get more and more skilled as they navigate super complex family scenarios in our communities. You can go to the next slide. Like I mentioned about equity and access, we have increased our partnerships with our school districts and our community partners pretty intensively. We've been working really hard on this, gathering feedback from our community partners, from our primary referral agents, and we've made a lot of shifts and adjustments in our systems and the way that we're addressing and interfacing with our community partners. And as a result of that, we've moved from about 2% of our referrals being from schools over the last 5 years to 33% of our referrals. And this is just in this school year, directly from our schools. And this, of course, we're here with the Roaring Fork School District, but, you know, Anna and the Roaring Fork School District represent so much more. And so, you know, we're here on behalf of Two Rivers, and we're here on behalf of Yampa, and we're here on behalf of our homeless youth and families and our homeschool families, everyone. So this is just a great display of what's happening in our partnership and how much more we're getting from our schools. We've decreased the barrier of transportation, so we go to schools or we drive to our communities. We have satellite offices all up and down Parachute to Aspen. We've also waived 100% of fees for schools. So if we get a direct referral for an incident that happens within the school day, 100% of those fees are waived from start to finish. And that comes out to be about $2,000 per youth and family, just depending on how intensive the need is. We've increased our bilingual staff, and we have 24/7 interpretation services. So that's getting a lot of traction right now for us. Go ahead, Anna. In Glenwood Springs alone, Aspen to Parachute, you can see that about 65% of our kids who are referred to us are in need of mental health services. In Glenwood Springs, that reaches about 90%. So we know that this is a hotspot for us. As a result, we have put one youth advocate in the city of Glenwood Springs who just serves our youth and families here so that we can be more responsive and be very quick. We've increased our referrals in Glenwood from 95 to 135. Our school engagement, like I said before, to about 33% of our referrals. Levi. And then last fiscal year, our need was about 1,776 hours of counseling. This year, we're seeing, sorry, I've got a kiddo transitioning to an activity right now, so I'm a little distracted. It's open. Yeah, okay. We all are juggling all of these things, right? We have this year, we are reaching 2,220 counseling hours that our youth just alone in the city of Glenwood Springs are needing. And that requires one mental health counselor for us. One counselor can provide around 2,080 hours. And so we know that we need more, but if we can at least start with one, that would put us in a good place to be more responsive. Go ahead, Anna. This is just a picture of where we get, just like the Roaring Fork School District, we piece it together quite a bit. So we get funding from all kinds of sources. Many of our sources are stable. especially our state grants. And we are always looking for more opportunity, especially now at the state and federal level, to access more funds. And so know that we are a part of these county conversations as well. We are advocating strongly for all of our municipalities, all of our school districts, and all of our youth and families in almost every meeting that we're in. So just wanted to give you a little bit about the youth zones part of it. And what questions do you have? I went fast.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're all out of time. I'm just kidding, Tony. Go ahead.
Well, I don't have a question. I just, I don't know if you know, Anna, my sister is the school counselor at Basalt Elementary, so I know a little bit about this, but I'm also, as Jamie knows, involved in kids in the criminal justice system. And just so you all know, this is so, so crucial. I would much rather see them at the front end in elementary school and early and middle school than in the back end in high school getting in trouble with issues. And so much of, Jamie, as you know, what we see in the criminal court or the district court is mental health related. And just finally, the stuff that's gone on in the last couple of years and the pressure that kids have been under with COVID and all the other things, I just think this is just so crucial. I was at the middle school a couple of weeks ago here in Glenwood, and there are a lot of kids in crisis there, and we really, really need this. So I'm very supportive. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the time.
Thanks. All right. Any further questions? Shelley, go ahead.
I just had a quick question on that one slide, Jamie, that you showed, that the higher need in Glenwood. What's the explanation for that almost 20-point jump?
It's really interesting. We're not sure exactly what's going on. And as we dig in, maybe Stephanie, you can lend a little bit more here. There are a lot of youth who have a lot of needs here, right in Glenwood. There's a lot of travel back and forth through this city, all up and down the valley. And what we do see, however, is the breakdown of the reason for referral is about as the same as it is all up and down the valley. That doesn't change, but the mental health need itself is bigger for us.
Yeah, that just is really concerning to me. So it'd be interesting to try to understand that better. But yes, I agree with what Tony said. These programs are so needed, and thank you for everything you guys do.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Jamie and Stephanie.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate the presentation. Guys, we are on a 59-minute break. We'll see you at 6:15.